When she was just 9 years old, Mayte Garcia said something most kids would laugh off as a fantasy. She turned to her mother and said, clear as day, one day, I'm going to marry Prince. Not a prince. The prince. The man in purple. The genius. The mystery. Her mother smiled politely and likely thought it was a child's imagination running wild. But Mayte wasn't dreaming. She was manifesting. And for a moment in time, she lived that dream. She didn't just marry Prince, she walked into a world few ever touched. A world of music, obsession, heartbreak, and secrets, the kind you don't understand until decades later when the spotlight has faded and all that's left is the silence, the memories, and the truth. At 51, Mayte Garcia isn't dwelling in the past, she's unpacking it. Not with bitterness, not with scandal, but with honesty. For years, she was silent, guarded. The world saw the headlines: teenager turned muse, whirlwind wedding, tragic loss, mysterious divorce. But behind that curated image was a girl becoming a woman struggling to hold love together while living in the shadow of genius. This isn't a revenge story. It's not a tell-all designed to shock or shame. It's a love letter, a warning, and a confession, because some stories look like fairy tales until you learn how they end. To understand why Mayte Garcia divorced Prince, you have to go back not to Paisley Park, not even to the wedding, but to the moment she first saw him. She was sitting in front of a screen, watching Purple Rain on repeat like millions of other girls in the 80s. But where others saw glitter and guitar solos, Mayte saw destiny. Every lyric, every movement, every defiant stare into the camera, it all felt personal. And maybe, in some strange poetic way, Mayte wasn't just a fan. She was a dancer, trained from childhood in belly dance and ballet. By 16, she wasn't just performing, she was impressing. Her mother, sensing something rare in her daughter's presence, made the kind of bold move only a mother could make. She packed a VHS tape of Mayte's performance, waited outside one of Prince's concerts in Germany, and handed it off to someone connected to his crew. That single act set a domino effect in motion, the kind of thing movies are made about. Prince saw the tape. Prince asked to meet her. And Prince, at age 32, looked at the 16-year-old standing in front of him with curiosity and control. It wasn't romantic, not yet. But it was personal. He saw something in Mayte, something magnetic, something fragile, and something he thought he could shape. Their connection started in innocence, or what looked like innocence: phone calls, handwritten letters, guarded conversations. There was an unmistakable power dynamic from the start, not just in age, but in experience, in fame, in control. Mayte was still a teenager navigating her first blush of contact with the man who had dominated her daydreams. Prince, on the other hand, was already a legend. But unlike other men in power, Prince didn't rush. He waited. Days turned to months, and Mayte focused on her life and school as Prince stayed in touch, sometimes disappearing for long stretches, then reaching back out like a flame refusing to burn out. When she turned 18, things shifted. Prince became her legal guardian, brought her into his inner circle, and ultimately into his world, first as a backup dancer, then as a companion, and finally as his partner. She moved into Paisley Park full-time, lived among the velvet curtains, private studios, and surreal schedules. It wasn't like being a normal girlfriend. Prince didn't do normal. He didn't date. He designed. He orchestrated. And to be close to him, you had to surrender to his rhythm, but even rhythms that sound perfect can fall out of sync. By the time Mayte was 22, she walked down the aisle beside Prince on Valentine's Day, 1996. It was lavish, poetic, symbolic, the perfect frame for the perfect couple. He promised love. He promised a future. And when he gave her the keys to a 7,000 square foot mansion in Spain, she believed that the story she'd written in her journal as a child had come true, but she had no idea what the price of that fairy tale would be. Mayte called it the most beautiful illusion she'd ever tasted. When Prince loved you, he didn't just love you, he enveloped you. The world fell away. There was just his voice, his music, his vision. She believed in them so deeply that she would have followed him into fire. And in some ways, she did. At first, their life together was surreal in the best possible way. Late-night studio sessions turned into early morning conversations, private flights to exotic cities, spontaneous trips to Paris or Morocco, shopping sprees where money didn't apply. He told her they had been together in a past life. That she wasn't just his wife, she was his soul's reflection. On one hand, Mayte laughed it off. On the other, she absorbed it like gospel. Prince had a way of making the mystical feel matter-of-fact, but even in those early days, she felt something pressing behind the magic pressure, fragility, silence where vulnerability should have been. 2 months into their marriage, Mayte got the news every young bride dreams of: she was pregnant. Prince was thrilled, or at least, that's what he told the world. He started writing songs about their future, framing music videos around the idea of family, fatherhood, home. But quietly, doctors delivered a difficult truth. There were complications. The baby's development wasn't meeting expectations. They urged caution. They suggested tests, options, hard conversations. Prince refused. He didn't believe in doctors, didn't trust hospitals, didn't let fear speak louder than faith. He told Mayte that if they just believed enough, if their love was strong enough, it would be okay. And when you live in a dream long enough, it becomes hard to tell truth from hope. Then came the birth. October 1996. For all the music and gifts and prayers, nothing could prevent the grief that followed. Their baby, Amir, was born with Pfeiffer syndrome type 2, a rare, severe genetic condition. He passed away 6 days later. 6 days, that's all they had with him. 6 days of hoping, pretending, disbelieving, and abruptly grieving. Mayte said she doesn't remember much from those days. Not because the memory faded, but because pain erased every detail. And Prince buried it. Not just the emotion. The fact itself. A few weeks later, they sat down with Oprah. She asked them plainly, gently, "How's the baby?" And Prince smiled. Said everything was fine. That they were a family. That they would have more children. Mayte looked forward and said nothing. She protected the illusion like a trained performer, but something broke inside her that day. Not just from the loss of their son, but from the silence between her and her husband. The way he rewrote the truth in real time. The way love became something he could erase and redraft on camera. She thought, if he can hide this from the world, what else will I be expected to bury? Still, grief isn't always loud. Sometimes, it just whispers. Pulls you apart slowly. Their closeness began to fray. Prince threw himself deeper into music, deeper into religion. Mayte tried to follow, to support him, to find healing in his spiritual transformation. He had become a Jehovah's Witness. He spoke more and more about sin, about roles, about control, not as a means of connection, but as doctrine. She found herself adjusting the way she spoke, the way she dressed. There were things she could no longer watch, no longer say. But she told herself, this is loss. This is mourning. Things will settle. Until they didn't, she got pregnant again. And once again, the dream flickered. But this time ended in a miscarriage, early and painful. Mayte fell apart, but Prince barely spoke. He walked past her in the hallway while she was sobbing on the floor. He didn't kneel. He didn't hold her. He left a rose on the counter, then went to the studio. That's what life with Prince often came down to: rose petals and silence. Passion without comfort. Grand gestures in place of conversation. There was beauty, yes, but beauty without safety. Still, she clung to the version of him she had loved. The version from the stage. The man who pulled magic from strings and summoned power from thin air. But she rarely saw that man at home anymore. At home, he was guarded, withdrawn, increasingly dogmatic. The mansion in Spain felt less like a home and more like a museum for a love that had already died. And then came the moment that shattered what little remained. Prince held a press conference in 1998. He stood before the world and announced he was annulling their marriage. Mayte found out when the world did. She watched him speak into the microphones like it was business as usual. Calm, poised, enigmatic. He didn't blink as he said it: their marriage would be annulled. There was no warning. No conversation. Not even a private goodbye. Just Prince, standing under lights, turning a love story into a footnote in a press release. Mayte was devastated but not surprised. The silence between them had become louder than their conversations. After the miscarriage, after the hollow mornings spent pretending it was all fine, she knew something inside him had changed. Or maybe, finally, she was seeing past the illusion. Prince, the man the world couldn't touch, was also a man no one could really hold, not even his wife. But it wasn't just grief that had changed him. It was guilt. Or maybe it was shame. He never spoke about the baby again. Never visited the grave. Never processed the loss in private or in public. Instead, he erased it. Rewrote their history as cleanly as he controlled his music rights. And for Mayte, who had held that child in her arms, who still woke up crying from dreams of 6 perfect days, there was no erasing that pain. She didn't fight the annulment. She didn't beg to stay. Because by the time he made it official, their marriage had already been hollowed out. What remained was a house in Spain she no longer visited, a closet full of purple memories, and a name attached forever to a man she could no longer reach. After Prince, Mayte vanished from the public eye. The media whispered about her, labeled her things she never claimed: teen bride, grieving widow, failed muse. No one asked what it meant to be 22 and carried the kind of grief that hardens in your bones. No one asked how it felt to lose a child and a marriage in the same breath, under the weight of legacy, camera flashes, and cold-eyed fans who didn't want to know the truth. She tried to move on. Brief romances, celebrity headlines, a broken engagement to Tommy Lee. But nothing fit. Nothing felt real after Prince. How could it? How do you open your heart to anyone when the last man you loved wrote the most beautiful love songs in the world about you? She said it herself in later years. Every poem sounded fake, every new love interest felt like an impersonation. Once you've tasted lightning, sparks start to feel like static. Still, Mayte rebuilt. Slowly. Quietly. She turned inward, found her voice as a writer and advocate. She danced again. Taught. She adopted a daughter, Gia, and became a mother in a way the universe had once denied her. And through it all, she spoke rarely of Prince until 2017, when her memoir The Most Beautiful, My Life with Prince, knocked down the final wall. People expected scandal. They expected tell-all drama. But what they got was something rarer: restraint, pain, love, and honesty. Mayte wasn't trying to tear Prince down. She was trying to show how loving someone extraordinary can quietly destroy you if you abandon yourself along the way. The memories she shared weren't just about fame and luxury. They were about the quiet war you fight when control becomes love's shadow. The way she was told what to wear, how to act, even how to speak. The way she felt erased after losing their child. The way love slowly became obedience, and yet, through all of it, she never stopped loving him. That's the part people don't understand. Yes, there was heartbreak. Yes, there was control. Yes, there was deep, unprocessed hurt. But Mayte loved Prince not for who he was on stage, but for who he was in between those flashes of fame: the childlike dreamer, the man who stayed up until 6 a.m. writing symphonies in his head, the soul who believed in cosmic connections and spiritual truths. He wasn't always kind. But he was always brilliant. And brilliance, when it touches you young, when it mixes with romance, and music, and magic, it stains you forever. So when the news came in 2016 that Prince had been found dead at age 57, alone, victim of a fentanyl overdose, Mayte didn't scream. She sank. Slowly. Quietly. As if the part of her that had hoped somewhere, somehow, they'd still find a way back to the bond they once shared, had finally let go. She'd already buried their baby. Now she was burying the man who once called her his destiny. For days after the news, Mayte couldn't bring herself to speak to anyone. It wasn't just the shock, it was the surreal weight of it. Prince had been too big, too mystical, too immortal in her mind to ever simply die. Even when they were falling apart, he still felt untouchable. And now, he was just gone. No goodbyes. No last words. Just silence. The same silence he'd used so often to protect himself from the world. She tried to hold it together. For her daughter. For her sanity. But when she was alone, when the house finally stopped humming with condolences and headlines, she sat on the floor with his old guitar in her lap and just cried. She cried for the boy she lost, for the husband who left without a word, for the wounds time had never fully closed. She admitted later that she always thought they'd talk again. Not to rekindle anything, not some Hollywood reunion. But a quiet dinner. A phone call. A moment. She believed that years might soften the edges, that healing might open a space for understanding. But that moment never came. Prince left her with that same final gesture he so often used, disappearing before she was ready. The revelations that followed about the opioid use, the secrecy, the prescriptions under aliases only deepened the confusion. This was the man who once lectured his bandmates for drinking too much coffee. The one who promoted clean living, prayed before shows, and made purity part of his brand. And yet, beneath all that discipline, he was fighting private demons nobody saw coming. Mayte could have gone to the media. She could have unleashed secrets, cashed in on tragedy, fueled speculation. But she didn't. Because despite everything, she still wanted to protect him. Even in death. Especially in death, but protecting his legacy didn't mean lying. It meant telling the human truth behind the superhuman myth. She said their story was never perfect. It wasn't smooth or safe or simple. It was wild, stormy, magical, and painful. But it was real. Their love wasn't built on fame. It existed in between the spotlights and the laughs they shared under the covers, the nights they stayed up dreaming of their baby, the ridiculous inside jokes only two people so entwined could ever understand. At 51, Mayte talks about it differently than she did at 31. Time has a way of softening sharp things, making space for empathy where anger once lived. She doesn't demonize Prince. She doesn't sanctify him either. What she does instead is honor the truth and the girl she was when she stood by his side. She remembers how it felt to sit in the control room at Paisley Park, watching him record alone for 10 hours straight without stopping to eat. She remembers how he'd order her favorite takeout just because. How he'd scribble lyrics on walls, hum harmonies in the shower, dance in the middle of the living room just to make her laugh. That was Prince, too. Not just the aloof genius. Not just the recluse or the rebel. He was a man, craving connection, just like anyone else, but sometimes, genius can't live in tenderness. Sometimes it demands obedience, silence, space. Mayte had learned firsthand what it means to love someone who was more myth than man. Loving Prince meant shrinking yourself to fit inside a story that already had its own music, its own tempo. You couldn't write beside him. You could only hope to be written in. That truth still echoes in how she lives today. She's cautious with love, cautious with fame. She's more grounded now, more deeply connected to her purpose outside of any man's shadow. Her daughter, Gia, became her second chance not to replace Amir, but to reclaim herself. Mayte says becoming a mother again taught her something she didn't know how to do when she was younger: how to create safety, how to speak truth, how to choose herself, and maybe that's the thread that runs through it all. She didn't leave Prince because she stopped loving him. She left because somewhere along the way, she stopped recognizing herself. She was disappearing. Quietly. Beautifully. Tragically. And she knew if she stayed, there would be nothing left of her but silk dresses and quiet sighs, another shadow in a palace full of ghosts. So when people ask her, "Why did you leave?" she doesn't give a simple answer, because there isn't one. Not there are 1,000 moments. 1,000 signs. Beautiful, painful, sacred, and walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of finding her way back to herself. There's a quiet power in surviving a love that tried to consume you. You don't come out untouched. You don't walk away the same. But if you're lucky, you walk away wiser. For Mayte Garcia, wisdom didn't come in loud declarations. It came in the soft moments, the quiet she once feared, the stillness she once avoided. That's where she found herself again. Life after Prince was not linear. There were starts and stops, rebuilds and relapses into old pain. She said there were days she hated him not because he was cruel, but because he made her feel invisible. And then there were nights she missed him so much her chest hurt. That's the kind of grief people don't talk about. The kind that doesn't come from hate or betrayal, but from love that was bigger than it could carry itself. When she wrote her memoir, it wasn't about settling scores. It was about silencing the noise. For years, other people had told her story for her tabloids, fans, interviewers with half-truths. She wanted to reclaim the narrative. Not to glorify or vilify, but to document. To heal. To be understood. The result was something rare in celebrity culture: vulnerability without sensationalism. She talked about the joy of their love, the ache of their loss, and the slow erosion of her identity in the shadow of a man larger than life. It resonated not just with fans of Prince, but with women everywhere who had loved deeply and lost parts of themselves in the process. Her story reached people outside the music world. Survivors of controlling relationships wrote to her. Young girls thanked her for showing what it takes to get out with grace. Mothers who had lost children said her words gave them something they thought they'd forgotten: permission to keep living, even when a piece of your heart is no longer here. That became Mayte's mission. Not fame. Not resurrection. Just connection. She started speaking more publicly, doing interviews where her voice was steady but soft. She didn't perform grief, and she didn't crown herself a victim. She stood in the middle of her contradictions, still loving the man who broke her heart, still owning the fact that she lost herself along the way, still believing that love can be both true and unlivable. People often want to simplify stories like Mayte's. They want the clear villain, the brave hero, the dramatic escape. But what makes her story resonate is that it doesn't offer that neat clarity. It's messy, human, honest, and in that mess, Mayte found purpose. She's continued dancing, teaching, and raising her daughter with the kind of grounded presence she never had in her 20s. At 51, she says she feels more like herself than ever. Not because fame has come back around, but because she knows who she is when the crowd's not watching. She's no longer Prince's ex-wife. She's Mayte, the little girl who believed in magic, the woman who survived it, and the mother who's now building something real, word by word, dance by dance, day by day. There was a time when even hearing one of his songs would crack something open inside her. Like a door she'd nailed shut without knowing there was still love waiting behind it. But now she can play those songs again. Not all of them, some still hurt. But enough to smile. Enough to remember how it felt when it was good. When she was young. When love felt like destiny, not a lesson. She doesn't wear trauma like armor. She wears experience like a soft fabric. Loose, breathable, flexible. She doesn't need to explain herself anymore. That's the thing about surviving someone unforgettable. You eventually realize you were unforgettable too, and even now, with all the years between her and the man she once called soulmate, she doesn't curse his name. She honors what she had, she grieves what she lost, and she lets it go again and again, one breath at a time, because real healing is allowed. It doesn't demand applause. It's waking up one day and knowing the version of yourself that danced in his music is still somewhere inside you, but she's not waiting for him anymore. She's dancing to her own rhythm now. Legacy is a strange thing. We often think it belongs to the ones who leave the biggest footprints on the stage. The icons. The geniuses. The names we never forget. Prince had one of the loudest legacies in music history. But legacy also belongs to those in the shadows, those who held the genius, loved the complicated soul inside it, and survived the aftermath. Mayte Garcia doesn't speak of her time with Prince as a chapter she wishes to erase. She doesn't flinch from the memories or edit the uncomfortable parts. Instead, she carries them like you'd carry a delicate photograph, faded, maybe a little torn, but still close to the heart. There's this idea that in telling your truth, you're somehow betraying someone else's. But Mayte shattered that illusion. She proved that you can hold space for contradiction. That you can honor a man's art without denying the damage he didn't mean to cause or the damage he never apologized for. By the time Prince died, Mayte had already written her story in pieces, first in silence, then in song, then on paper. That book wasn't the end of her healing, and it wasn't the start either. It was just another step in learning how to live beyond the dream. Because the dream had come true. She did marry Prince. She did live inside the magic for a while. But she also lived through its unraveling. Through the ache of loss. Through the loneliness at the heart of glamour. There's something deeply human in realizing that the person who once felt like your entire future is just a chapter in your past. And not in a bitter way. Just in a way that says you kept going. You didn't get stuck in the memory. You didn't let the pain define you. Mayte's life today isn't a sequel to her years with Prince. It's its own novel. One filled with the real kind of love, the kind you give yourself first. And sometimes, the greatest revenge against a turbulent past isn't anger, or public confrontation, or scandal. Its peace. Her peace lives in the way she raises her daughter with compassion and honesty and joy that doesn't depend on anyone else giving it to her. It lives in her dance classes, in the way her students smile as she shows them steps she once choreographed with Prince himself. It lives in quiet mornings without cameras, without pressure, without promises she has to keep to anyone but herself. She doesn't look for closure anymore. That's another myth. People like to chase the idea that pain ends with answers. That if someone just told you why, the wound would close. But grief doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't ask for reasons. It asks for truth. And Mayte's truth is this: she loved him. Deeply. Enough to give him her youth, her music, her body, her heart. And when it was time, she loved herself enough to walk away, and maybe that's why her story matters so much. Because it reminds us that even the stories that look picture perfect from the outside can carry deep, hidden cracks. The crown is heavy. The palace is cold. And not every muse is meant to be molded, they're meant to be seen, cherished, and eventually freed. At 51, Mayte isn't trying to escape the past. She lives alongside it. She carries it with grace, the good, the painful, the unforgettable. Some days, she says, she still dreams of him. Not sad dreams. Just moments. Snippets. As if some invisible thread between them still hums quietly through time. And maybe it does. Love doesn't vanish. It changes shape. So what does Mayte say when people ask her why she divorced Prince? She smiles. And then she tells the truth, because that's what she's earned. She divorced him because staying would have meant losing herself entirely. Because love isn't always enough. Because music, magic, and soul connections still need safety. Still need honesty. Still need room to breathe, and above all, because leaving allowed her to become who she was always meant to be, not just someone's muse, not a chapter in a genius's songbook, but the author of her own story. A story that begins with love and ends with freedom.